initially, when I wrote my proposal and when I first, whatever it was, 2 years ago, started thinking about this project, my main goal was to investigate the psychological assumptions made by a philosophical conception of wisdom that I had developed and defended in a book that came out last May. Wisdom wasn't the sole, wisdom was about a third of that book, and the conception of wisdom in that book was not really comprehensive. It was in the aid of defending a theory of what it is to live well. And now, as I've started to work more diligently on this project, the goals are changing and the project is expanding. So what I'm conceiving my goals to be now are to expand the conception of wisdom to be more comprehensive. And when I say more comprehensive, I do mean just more than it was before, not actually very comprehensive. So the kind of wisdom that I'm focused on is practical wisdom. It's, I'm thinking of wisdom as applied to an agent, so not wisdom as content, but the wisdom of a person. And I'm thinking of wisdom in a kind of personal sort of context, living a life as opposed to being a wise leader. So the main questions for this current part of the project, the methodological part of the project is the part I've been working on all semester, and the questions that my graduate student Jason Swartwood and I are thinking about are: how do we defend a definition of wisdom? What are the criteria of success for a theory of wisdom? In moral philosophy, really the default method for defending normative theories is a methodology called reflective equilibrium, which I'll say a bit about in a second. And so the question is this a good method for theorizing about wisdom? Reflective equilibrium is a coherence methodology. Standardly, it proceeds by figuring out our intuitions about cases. So intuitions or judgments about specific cases: is that particular action right or wrong? Is it good or bad, virtuous or vicious? And then on the other hand, moral principles. And you try to make a coherent package out of these two things, sacrificing as few of the intuitions as possible and choosing the principles that explain as many of the intuitions as you can. So what Jason and I have been trying to do is to essentially put some meat on the bones of the wide reflective equilibrium model and to show how it would work for wisdom. Part of the reason we want to start with implicit theory rather than intuitions is that philosophers' intuitions, which is what we would start with if we were starting with our own intuitions, are notoriously theory-laden. So they're not a very good place to start for that reason. The other reason to start with, so to speak, the intuitions of the folk, of people, is that we think a theory of wisdom has to be, it has to be importantly related to the ideals of character that people actually have. But what we do is we start with some conclusions from implicit theory research. We provide a sort of philosophical elucidation. We would think about background empirical theories like theories of reasoning in order to generate specific strategies that enact those more general policies. And then that whole picture that we end up with, we evaluate against the background of certain kinds of philosophical theories. This is what we take from the implicit theory research. Deep understanding, reflective capacities that are productive of that deep understanding, problem-solving capacities that allow a wise person to apply the understanding, and certain kinds of motivations. What we do with the philosophical elucidation is we're starting with implicit theory stuff and then trying to develop the view within a framework that's structured with certain kinds of desiderata that we have for a theory. And here the desiderata are: we think a theory of wisdom has to be reason-giving, it has to be action-guiding. That's a tied to how specific it is. It can't be so vague and general that you can't get any practical conclusions from it. And it has to be empirically adequate. It can't make assumptions about people that just turn out to be false. And philosophers are kind of notorious for having empirically unsound sorts of theories of virtue. When we get to the stage of evaluation, I made this box bigger, the background philosophical theories of the good life. that's the main ground that the main ground we're using to evaluate how the picture of wisdom that we developed looks. But notice that it's not this anymore. Now it's this. So we've complicated the picture quite substantially. So there's a lot more, there are a lot more connections between things and a lot more elements to be evaluated, which I think adds to the justification of the picture that emerged.